Brendan noticed some unusual chunks of hair on the floor. He walked into the kitchen and found Romeo lying next to his food bowl. The bowl was untouched, and he realized that Romeo hadn't eaten anything since the previous night. This was concerning because Romeo was usually a voracious eater and finished his meals quickly. Brendan wondered what could be wrong with his furry friend and decided to keep a close eye on him. He knew that a loss of appetite could be a sign of illness, so he made the mental note to observe Romeo's behavior carefully and to take him to the vet if the situation did not improve. Brendan hoped that Romeo was just having an off day and would soon return to his usual self. As the day progressed, Brendan noticed that Romeo hadn't moved around much and his tail barely wagged, which was unusual for him. Brendan grew increasingly worried and decided it was best to take him to the vet to find out what was happening. Brendan knew that it was important to act quickly because he loved Romeo very much and wanted to ensure that he received the best care possible. Unfortunately, the vet delivered some bad news. It appeared that Romeo was in poor health and was slowly deteriorating. In fact, the vet mentioned that Romeo had little time left. This news was quite devastating for Brendan as he loved Romeo very much and the thought of losing his furry friend was heart-wrenching. As he returned home, he couldn't help but think about all the wonderful memories he had shared with Romeo over the years. The walks in the park, the games, the adventures, the moments of cuddling on the couch all flooded back to him. Brendan knew that he was losing his loyal companion and it was hard to accept. Quietly, he began to sob, trying to come to terms with the fact that Romeo was on his way to death. Although Brendan felt helpless, he knew that he wanted to make the remaining days of Romeo's life as happy and comfortable as possible. He promised to cherish every moment with his furry friend and give him all the love and attention he deserved. As Brendan sat with Romeo, he couldn't help but think about the day he had found him. It had been a time of great turmoil in his life, with his divorce causing him immense pain and suffering. Brendan had felt lost and alone, and he often spent his days aimlessly wandering around the city, hoping to find some peace of mind. One day, as he was walking, he spotted a dog eating out of a fast food bag. He slowly approached the dog and made some clicking sounds with his mouth. The dog immediately perked up and came running towards him. At that moment, Brendan didn't know if the dog was running at him with good intentions or not, but he had taken a chance and allowed him to come closer. Much to his surprise, Romeo had come right into his lap and started licking his palm. Brendan had been taken aback by the dog's friendly behavior, but he soon realized that Romeo was just seeking some affection and attention. The dog leaned back as if asking Brendan to pet him, and Brendan obliged. From that moment on, their bond grew stronger and they became inseparable. Brendan couldn't help but smile as he remembered the joy that Romeo had brought into his life. Romeo had been a lifesaver for Brendan. After taking the dog in, he had noticed a significant improvement in his mood and overall well-being. Romeo's barking at night had forced Brendan to take him outside for walks, which had helped him to become more active and get rid of his depression. He would often run around with Romeo, trying to tire him out so that they could both fall asleep. This had helped Brendan to become more fit and healthy, and he had noticed a positive change in his mental state as well. Romeo's outgoing nature had also inspired Brendan to go on adventures. They had explored the woods, gone hiking and fishing, and even visited several national parks together. They had created a list of places they would visit each year, and Brendan had found a renewed sense of purpose and joy in life thanks to his furry companion. In short, the homeless dog had helped Brendan to rediscover his zest for life and had made him feel alive again. Brendan had made up his mind to take Romeo on one final adventure, a trip to the Grand Canyon. He knew that this might be their last trip together, so he wanted to make it a special one. He began packing everything he needed for the journey, making sure to include all of Romeo's favorite treats and toys. He also booked their flights, excited at the prospect of spending some quality time with his furry friend in one of the most beautiful natural wonders of the world. As he prepared for the trip, Brendan couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet anticipation. On one hand, he was excited about the adventure that lay ahead, but on the other, he knew that this might be the last trip he would take with Romeo. Nonetheless, he was determined to make the most of their time together and create some lasting memories that he could cherish for years to come. At the check-in counter, the officer informed Brendan that due to Romeo's age, he couldn't be transported in the cargo hold of the airplane. The officer asked if Brendan would be willing to leave the dog with someone else, but that was out of the question for Brendan. He tried to explain his situation to the officer, but the conversation seemed to be going nowhere. Meanwhile, a passenger standing in line behind Brendan began to complain, accusing him of holding up the line. This only added to the stress of the situation. Frustrated and upset, he began to argue with the impatient passenger. However, he soon realized that this wasn't getting him anywhere, and he decided to take a step back and think about his options. He went back to the bench where he sat down and began to pet Romeo, feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. As he sat there, he noticed the captain and his crew approaching the gate. It was then that Brandon had an idea. He mustered up the courage to approach the captain and asked him if there was any way he could take Romeo on board with him. He explained the situation and how important this trip was for him and his beloved dog. "Excuse me, sir, are you the captain in charge of the flight to Flagstaff?" Brandon asked, trying to get the attention of the busy man in the pilot's uniform. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" replied the captain, glancing at Romeo and smiling. "I'm having trouble bringing my dog on board. The check-in officer says it's too old to travel in the cargo hold, and it's really important for me to bring him along. Do you have any suggestions?" Brandon asked pleadingly. "I understand how you feel, sir, but unfortunately, I don't have the authority to override the rules." "I'm sorry," replied the captain sympathetically. "Is that a German mix?" he asked, noticing the dog's breed. "Yes, it is. How did you know?" Brandon was surprised by the captain's knowledge. "I used to know one." "Well, I wish I could help you more, sir," replied the captain, his lips tightening in regret as he started to walk away. As the captain left, Brandon continued to pet Romeo, feeling helpless and unsure of what to do next. "Come on, Romeo. Looks like we'll have to take the long drive," Brandon said, disappointed. Just then, the captain turned around and approached him. "Excuse me, did you say Romeo?" the captain asked, looking at the dog. "Yes, that's my pup, Romeo," Brandon replied. I think I know who you are. You must be Brandon," the captain said with a smile. "How did you know?" "Yes, I am." Brandon was getting curious. Captain started beaming as he connected all the dots. "Does the name Lloyd Garner ring any bells for you?" Captain asked. Brandon gazed off into the distance and pondered intently on why the name struck a chord in his memory. Suddenly, he lifted his head with a realization, knowing precisely who the captain was referring to. When Brandon found Romeo, he initially brought him to a shelter with the intention of reuniting the dog with its owner. However, after a week had passed with no one coming forward to claim Romeo, Brandon decided to keep him for himself. After forming a strong bond, Brandon considered enrolling Romeo and himself in a training program. It took them 2 years of consistent training to pass the certification test. While out with Romeo one day, Brandon received a message from a friend who worked at the police department about a missing 81-year-old man with Alzheimer's and dementia. The man had been missing since 5:20 p.m. and it was now 8:45 p.m. He was only wearing a thermal shirt and pajama pants, and the temperature outside was 33 degrees. Despite the police department's use of bloodhound teams, they still needed additional help and asked if Romeo could assist in the search. Brandon and Romeo joined the police department's bloodhound team to assist in the search. They started by following a scent from a rope that was given to Brandon by the police department. However, they soon discovered that the subject's son had also worn the same robe, so the scent became contaminated. The team then had to switch to a different scent, and eventually, Romeo picked up a fresh trail. When they reached the area where the bloodhound lost the scent, they encountered firefighters who had already searched the area visually and with a thermal imaging device. The surrounding area was mostly bordered by steep canals, making it difficult for someone with mobility issues like the missing man to traverse. After checking the canal's edge, they retraced their steps and followed the wind back to where the trail was lost. Eventually, at around 1:15 a.m., Romeo barked once as he had been trained to do. Brandon was nearby and quickly found the missing man lying on his side by a shallow ravine, holding Romeo away from his face as the dog liked to lick people's faces. After the successful rescue operation, the 81-year-old man was hospitalized and discharged a few days later. When he was feeling better and able to speak, his wife asked if he could recall any details about his ordeal. He replied that he couldn't recall how he ended up in the ravine, but he vividly remembered the dog that licked his face. The whole family was laughing. The man's wife was overwhelmed with emotion. She hugged Brandon tightly and thanked him with tears in her eyes. The man's daughter, who lived far away, sent a heartfelt message to Brandon, thanking him and Romeo for bringing her father back to her. She told him how much her father loved dogs and how he used to have one when she was a child. "I am the son of Lloyd Garner. My name is Ethan Garner," the captain said. The captain's words left Brandon in disbelief as he struggled to process the coincidence that had just occurred. It was as if fate had orchestrated their meeting in a way that was beyond comprehension. The captain said that he had been at work when his father went missing and was unable to thank Brendan and Romeo for their heroic actions. When he returned home, he asked about Brendan Banks and was told that he was a modest man who preferred to stay out of the limelight. Despite not being able to express his gratitude in person, Ethan was thankful for their intervention and felt that it was a sign from God. The captain's face was filled with joy as he spoke. "Mr. Banks, thank you for bringing my father back," the captain said and hugged Brendan. Brendan was looking at the captain. Then he looked at Romeo and said, "Well, if it wasn't for this guy, I don't know where I would be. Thank you, buddy, for coming into my life and giving me so many bright moments." Brendan was crying. The captain's smile widened as he watched Brendan wipe away his tears. "Well, I suppose today I'm going to bend some rules," the captain said. "You're going to fly first class and see the Grand Canyon." Brendan's eyes immediately widened in excitement, and a big grin spread across his face as he petted Romeo and then hugged him tightly. Brendan couldn't believe his luck. He sank into the plush leather seat, feeling grateful and overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness of the captain. He looked over at Romeo, who was curiously peering out the window, his tail wagging in excitement. The captain announced through the speakerphone that they had 2 special passengers on board, Mr. Banks and his heroic dog Romeo, who had saved the captain's father's life a few years ago. The announcement was met with a round of applause, and the passengers on the plane looked at them with admiration and appreciation. Brendan felt a little uncomfortable at first with all the attention, but he couldn't help but feel proud of Romeo and himself. He glanced over at Romeo, who was wagging his tail and panting happily. As the airplane took off, Brendan gazed out the window, taking in the stunning view of the clouds and the sun setting in the distance. He couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed since he found Romeo. From a simple act of kindness, he had formed an unbreakable bond with the loyal dog and had gone on to use his skills and training to help others in need. Now, here he was, sitting in first class with Romeo by his side, on his way to see one of the wonders of the world. Brendan felt grateful for the captain's generosity and couldn't wait to see the Grand Canyon with his own eyes. The rest of the flight went by smoothly, and when they finally arrived in Arizona, the captain escorted them to a waiting limousine. The captain smiled, his eyes sparkling with kindness. "You and Romeo deserve it," he said. "And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning of more adventures to come." "Thank you, Ethan," Brendan said, and they drove off. After a couple hours of slow walking, Brendan and Romeo sat on the flat rock and enjoyed the view of the Grand Canyon. As they sat there, Brendan couldn't help but feel grateful to see such a breathtaking sight with his loyal companion by his side. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the vast expanse of the canyon. The stillness of the moment was only interrupted by the occasional sound of a bird or the rustling of leaves in the nearby bushes. Brendan was holding Romeo's head in his lap. He took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp, fresh air of the canyon, feeling content and at peace. "Thank you, buddy. Thank you for everything," Brendan said. A few tears trickled down Brendan's face, landing on Romeo's cheek. Brendan was patting his best friend and telling him how much he loved him. Brendan and Romeo spent their last few weeks together at home, just enjoying each other's company. They would sit together on the porch, watching the world go by, or lie together in the sun on the lawn. Romeo was getting weaker and weaker, and Brendan noticed his heavy breathing. He stopped taking Romeo on long walks, instead opting for shorter strolls around the block. Brendan knew that their time together was coming to an end, and he wanted to make the most of it. During those weeks, Brendan thought a lot about their adventures together. He remembered the time when they found Lloyd Garner and how Romeo had saved his life. Brendan knew that he wouldn't have been able to do it without Romeo's help. He also remembered the time when Romeo had helped a little girl find her way back to her parents in a crowded park. Brendan smiled at the memory, knowing that Romeo was a hero in his own right. As the days passed, Romeo's health continued to decline. Brendan stayed by his side, never leaving him alone. He knew that Romeo was in pain, but he wanted to make sure that his best friend was as comfortable as possible. Brendan spent his nights sleeping on the floor next to Romeo's bed, holding his paw and whispering words of love and encouragement. When Romeo passed away, Brendan was devastated. He had lost his best friend, his loyal companion, his hero. But he knew that Romeo was in a better place now, free from pain and suffering. Brendan buried Romeo in the backyard, under the oak tree where they used to play fetch. He planted a small garden around Romeo's grave, filled with flowers and herbs that Romeo had loved. Brendan knew that Romeo would have wanted it that way. Brendan couldn't bring himself to walk Romeo's route again. It was too painful. But after a few weeks of grieving, he decided to honor his best friend's memory by running around the places they used to go. The first few runs were difficult, as he could still feel Romeo's presence with him, but as he continued to run, Brendan felt himself becoming stronger, both physically and emotionally. And so, Brendan continued to run every day, cherishing the memories of Romeo and the beauty of the world they shared. He knew that he would never forget his best friend and that Romeo's spirit would live on with him forever. After a few months, Brendan was following his usual running route when he felt exhausted and decided to take a break on the bench. As he was wiping his face from sweat, he felt a tugging sensation on his pants. At first, he ignored it, but then he looked down and saw a small German mix puppy nibbling on his shoelaces. The puppy was determined to get Brendan's attention and play with him. Brendan looked at the puppy, surprised and slightly amused. The puppy was staring at him with its big, curious eyes and wagging its tail furiously. Brendan knelt down and started petting the little puppy, feeling a sense of warmth spreading through his heart. He noticed the puppy was shivering, probably from the cold and damp weather. He decided to take the puppy home with him, at least for the night, and find its owner the next day. Despite his efforts to find the puppy's owners in various shelters, Brendan was unable to locate them. He began to feel that it was meant to be and saw this as a new beginning. Brendan felt like fate had given him a new furry companion. He named the German mix puppy Rex and started a new journey with his best friend by his side. They started to explore the world together and create new memories. Brendan knew that Romeo would always hold a special place in his heart, but he was grateful to have Rex by his side to continue their